Dr. Baker, thank you. Dr. Baker is a professor in the program for the study of women and gender at Smith College. She holds a law degree in the program for the study of, she has a law degree from Emory University, as well as an MA and PhD. She is an expert on women's rights and law and policy, specializing in sexual harassment, sex trafficking, and reproductive rights and justice. She has published 3 books and is a contributing editor of the Ms. magazine and regularly writes on these topics for the magazine. Please help me welcome Dr. Kerry Baker.
So nice to see everybody tonight. It's wonderful to be here. And I've put in the chat box both my Ms. Magazine page where my articles appear, as well as my website, the particular page that has my reproductive rights articles. So I just wanted to share that with you. I write regularly for Ms. and I have a few specialties, although I actually write pretty broadly. In the area of reproductive rights, I've been doing a lot on abortion rights. The recent Supreme Court case that's been accepted, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Center, I've written on the Women's Health Protection Act, which was introduced in Congress and just passed this past week. I've written, but one area that I really specialize in is medication abortion and telemedicine abortion, which has been a huge phenomena with the COVID. And I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about that, as well as abortion rights more generally. And so I've been asked to talk about abortion rights in North Carolina and also in the country. And I think that probably the best way for me to start is to sort of give a big context and then zero into what's happening in North Carolina. Because can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. I see people nodding their heads. All right, so let me just start first by talking a little bit about where we are at the national level. So I'm sure you've heard a lot about SB 8, which is a Texas law that bans abortion at 6 weeks. Now, when they say 6 weeks, they actually mean 4 weeks post fertilization. So 6 weeks is measured from the last menstrual period. And of course, you don't actually become pregnant until 2 weeks later. So we're talking about 4-week-old embryos. That is when abortion is banned in Texas. Texas is not the only state to ban abortion at 6 weeks. About 8 or 9 states have done this, but in every single other case, it's been enjoined by a court, meaning a court has not allowed the bill to go into effect. The reason that the Texas law has gone into effect is that it had a very unusual enforcement scheme. Normally, when a law bans abortion, the state enforces the law. So when such a law passes, advocacy groups like the Center for Reproductive Rights, or ACLU, sues the state and gets a court to enjoin the law and basically put it on hold until there can be a full hearing on the merits. And then usually when there's a full hearing on the merits, it's ruled to violate Roe v. Wade, because it does. Roe v. Wade doesn't allow restrictions before, or bans before viability, which is like 24 weeks. But the sort of devious thing about the Texas law is that rather than having the state enforce the law, it allowed private parties to enforce the law. So anybody in the state of Texas or elsewhere can bring a private lawsuit against anybody helping a person get an abortion. So that could be an abortion doctor, it could be a nurse or a receptionist in a clinic, it could be somebody who's driving their friend to a clinic, it could be an abortion fund, anybody. And the reason that Texas did this is abortion rights are based in the 14th Amendment. And the 14th Amendment only restricts governments, states. It does not restrict private parties. So by delegating the authority to enforce the law to private parties, it became much more difficult to challenge the law. And so what the Center for Reproductive Rights did is they filed a lawsuit, and the parties they sued were every judge in the state of Texas and every clerk in the state of Texas, plus a anti-abortion activist who had threatened to sue. And so, in other words, it was hard to figure out who to sue because, because of the nature of the law. And because of that weird procedural positioning or posturing of the case, it ended up getting sort of tangled up in the courts procedurally. And the district court probably would have enjoined it. There was supposed to be a hearing the Monday before September 1st when it went into effect, but it got appealed up to the Fifth Circuit, and there was a panel of very conservative judges that basically canceled the hearing on Monday and allowed the law to go into effect. And the Center for Reproductive Rights filed it up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court allowed it to go into effect. And I think it's largely because of the Supreme Court now is a 6-3 anti-abortion supermajority. And 5 of the 9 justices voted to not stop the law from going into effect, even though it was clearly in violation of the Constitution. What they said is, well, we're not ruling on the merits. This is just a procedural thing. This case is not right for us to hear. But, they easily could have said, well, this law is clearly unconstitutional, so we'll just enjoin it until it can be heard. They didn't do that. So as a result, on September 1st, the law went into effect. Now, since then, the Department of Justice, Merrick Garland, has filed a lawsuit against the law on a number of grounds. And sort of procedurally, that's a stronger lawsuit in the sense that, it's the Department of Justice, but also it's bringing claims that are very strong sort of legally. But again, it sort of has to go through the process of the courts. And there is a hearing coming up on that. There's also a third lawsuit, namely a doctor openly performed an illegal abortion or a post 6-week abortion. He wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post about it. And then 2 people, not from Texas, one's I think from Illinois and one's from maybe Florida, filed a lawsuit under the law. And what it allows private parties to do is basically sue for damages, even if they have no relation to the person who got an abortion at all. It doesn't have to be anybody that has any kind of interest. A random stranger, third party. It could even be somebody that's raped a woman who's had an abortion after 6 weeks. That person could actually sue the doctor, or an abusive partner could sue the doctor and get his attorney's fees, at least $10,000, and other kinds of damages. So it's really a really odious law. It's horrifying that the courts have allowed it to go into effect. But interestingly, it's modeled after laws that went into effect in Texas and other states in the 50s, post Brown versus Board of Education. What states in the South did is that they delegated running elections to private organizations that then had whites only primaries. So in other words, states tried to do a similar thing back in the 50s so that Black people couldn't vote. And they knew the 14th Amendment meant that they couldn't openly ban Black people from voting. But if they delegated the running of elections to private parties and then the private parties did it, they thought, oh, we can do an end run around the Constitution. Well, it didn't work. It went all the way to the Supreme Court. And in a case, I think it was called Terry versus Adams out of Texas, the court said, you can't do that. You can't do indirectly what the Constitution explicitly prohibits you from doing directly. So there's a pretty strong precedent that what they've done is not constitutional, either under Roe, but even under other precedents. But of course, with regard to Roe, the concern is that the court is now prepared to overturn Roe because of, with the 3 Trump appointees, there's this 6-3 supermajority. So I see a question, what danger are we in today with regard to removing chemistries that women are using today to prevent pregnancy? Okay, so I'll get to that. So we're talking about the abortion pill, it sounds like, or maybe even Plan B. So let me get to that in just 1 second. I want to just quickly say the Supreme Court has accepted a case out of Mississippi that bans abortion at 15 weeks. So this is a case that would overturn Roe, at least in part, if the court were to uphold this law. And, you know, the scary thing about them accepting this case is that normally the court only accepts a case if there's a split in the circuit or unclear precedent. Well, the precedent is very clear. Pre-viability abortion bans violate Roe versus Wade and Casey versus Planned Parenthood, which was a 1992 decision that kind of, well, it actually eroded Roe a little bit, but it did still affirm pre-viability abortion rights. The fact that they accepted this case without any sort of reason to, it's a very clearly unconstitutional case, or state law in Mississippi, really makes a lot of people worried that the court is prepared to overturn Roe or to significantly erode Roe in some way. So, you know, because of the Texas law now also, you know, the concern is that the court, you know, with a case like a 6-week ban coming right up behind the Mississippi case, the court could be about to overturn Roe versus Wade. The issue in that case is whether pre-viability abortion bans are constitutional. So just to clarify, viability is somewhere around 24 weeks or so. You know, it's at about the beginning of the 3rd trimester. And so we'll see what happens in that case. Oral arguments will be in October. Actually, I think they're December 1st is when they actually, is that right? When they scheduled oral arguments? That might, I'm forgetting now, but anyway, they're coming up. And then the decision in that case will happen next summer, probably in June or July, right before the end of the term. So that's where we stand as far as the Supreme Court. But they've done a number of things like allowing this Texas law to go into effect that make a lot of people that watch the court very concerned that the court is going to overturn Roe versus Wade. By the way, in that case, the 6th conservative judge that didn't vote to allow Texas law to go into effect is the Chief Justice Roberts, who is solidly anti-abortion, but he's also very concerned about the legacy of the court. And so I think that was interesting that he did that. But that said, there were 5 others, you know, the 3 Trump appointees, plus Alito and Clarence Thomas, who voted to allow the Texas law to go to effect. So most abortion providers in Texas have now stopped doing abortion after 6 weeks. And this means that many people in Texas who need abortion are traveling out of state. They're going to New Mexico, to Colorado, to Louisiana, to the surrounding states to try to gain access to abortion services. Now, this is very, very difficult for people that are low income, that don't have the funds to travel out of state. Guttmacher Institute, which is a research institute, estimated that people have to travel 14 times as far now to get to an abortion provider since this ban went into effect. They have to travel, I think it was on average 200 miles to get to a provider. And, you know, some of these surrounding states have waiting periods. You have to find childcare. You have to leave your job. I mean, this is hugely burdensome for many people. I am sure there are people in Texas who are now being forced to go through with pregnancies that they did not want to have to go through. That said, there's been a major uptick in people ordering abortion pills online. And this goes to Terry's question, what danger are we in today with regard to removing abortion pill that women are using to prevent pregnancy after intercourse? Terry, were you talking about Plan B or the abortion pill?
I was actually talking about both. But Carrie, let me tell you, before we started, we told the group that we would handle questions after the meeting, but people will be putting questions into the chat.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'm totally fine with that.
But I was
So-
talking about both.
Yeah. So, I mean, they're very different, okay, for a number of reasons. So nobody is talking about not allowing Plan B, which is the pill that you take within, 3 to 5 days after unprotected sex to prevent pregnancy. Plan B only works if you're not pregnant. It prevents a pregnancy. It's now available over the counter, and you can get it in pharmacies across the country. And to my knowledge, there's no talk about making Plan B inaccessible in any way. That said, anti-abortion people don't like Plan B. They often confuse it and intentionally with the abortion pill, but these two drugs are completely different. Plan B is basically like a double, triple dose of birth control. And if you're already pregnant, it has no effect on the pregnancy. It prevents pregnancy. The abortion pill, on the other hand, if you're pregnant, it can end a pregnancy. So those are very, very different. And so now I want to talk a little bit about the abortion pill, because that is another really significant issue going on today around abortion rights. So in 2000, well, let me even go back further. In 1980, a pill was developed called mifepristone, which interrupts progesterone. It's a progesterone, it inhibits the reuptake of progesterone. So it basically means that progesterone doesn't flow to the pregnancy to maintain it. It blocks progesterone. And so progesterone is what keeps a pregnancy going. And so if you take mifepristone, the pregnancy ends, basically. It's like inducing a miscarriage. And so once you take it, there's no more progesterone, the pregnancy begins to shed away from the uterine wall. And then within 24 to 48 hours, you take a second pill called misoprostol, which causes contractions, which expels the contents of the uterus. And the experience is very much like a miscarriage. It will manifest as a heavy period, especially if you're taking it early in pregnancy. You might have some cramping, you'll have bleeding, and the pregnancy will end. It's 95% effective, and it's safer than Tylenol. I think it's really important to keep in mind, because a lot of people make it sound like it's dangerous or, difficult. It's very, very safe. And there's enormous research on this. I followed the research very closely. The problem is the FDA approved the pill in 2000, but because of anti-abortion pressure, they put it under a drug safety program that came to be called the REMS program, which stands for Risk Evaluation and Mitigation Systems Program. REMS is a short way of referring to it. And it's a drug safety program that's put in place to protect people against dangerous drugs. Now, mifepristone is not dangerous, but because of the politically unpopular nature of mifepristone, it was put under this restriction. And it was only allowed to be used during the first 7 weeks of pregnancy, and the dosage was pretty high. It was 600 milligrams. Over time, it became clear, 1, this is a really safe drug, 2, it can be used later in pregnancy, and 3, you didn't need 600 milligrams, that actually can make it kind of hard, and that it's better to use less. And pro-choice folks lobbied for years to try to get the FDA regulations around the drug changed. And in 2016, under the Obama administration, they got some of the regulations changed. They extended the use to 10 weeks. They reduced the level to 200 milligrams. And they what was the third thing? There was one other thing, but anyway, they still kept it under this REMS program. And what that means is that it can't be distributed through a pharmacy like most drugs. A doctor who is going to prescribe it has to order the drugs themselves. They get on the list of the manufacturer and they order the drugs and stock them themselves and distribute them directly to their patients. And what most people have interpreted the REMS to require is that the doctor hand the pill directly to the patient. And then they give the misoprostol, the patient goes home, takes the pill at home, waits 24 to 48 hours, and then takes the misoprostol and passes the pregnancy at home. When COVID hit and, it became risky to travel to a doctor's office and to have in-person interactions with people, a group of advocacy groups and medical clinics filed a lawsuit in federal court in Baltimore, arguing that the in-person distribution requirement under this REMS restriction should be lifted for the duration of the pandemic. It got tried in the trial court, and a federal judge, lifted the REMS restriction. They said that it was an undue burden to require patients to have to travel in person and potentially expose themselves to COVID to get this pill that doctors could just mail to patients, like many other medications that doctors began to mail, and through telemedicine abortion and all of that. So that was monumental. So that was in July of 2020. The Trump administration at the time immediately appealed that decision, but it was in effect until January of 2021. And during that time period, a bunch of organizations began to offer telemedicine abortion. So they were kind of virtual abortion clinics. They began to, they made websites, they had numbers you could call. And they did either video conferencing or telephone calls, or even sometimes just online forums where they would screen patients for whether they were good candidates for medication abortion. And if they were, then they would mail the pills directly to the patients. Now, a footnote here. 19 states do not allow telemedicine abortion. So they have independent state laws that ban mailing the pill through the mail. So in addition to the REMS restriction, they didn't allow it anyway. It was kind of like double protection before the REMS or the in-person mailing was removed. Unfortunately, North Carolina is one of those states. So you were not able, during that window when it was legal, you were not able to have telemedicine abortion. So in January of 2021, the Trump administration twice took this case all the way to the Supreme Court. And on the second time up there, with the addition of Amy Coney Barrett, the Supreme Court reversed that Maryland court decision and said, no, that you cannot mail the abortion pills. So in the 29 states that were starting to mail the abortion pill, it all of a sudden, they weren't able to do it anymore. And these, many of these startup clinics stopped mailing the abortion pill. But they came up with really creative solutions. There was one clinic called Just the Pill, which had been mailing abortion pills in Minnesota. When the January 14th decision came down, they bought a van and began to drive around the state to rural areas and hand out abortion pills to people in person. So they weren't doing it by telemedicine, but they were getting it to the people in the rural areas that needed it. So, and in many states where there aren't abortion providers, except in cities, telemedicine abortion was incredible to increasing access, particularly for low-income people, and making it so that they didn't have to take time off work and get childcare and drive hundreds of miles to get into cities. So it was quite impactful. But January 14th, the Supreme Court reversed, and it was no longer available. By the way, I know a few doctors did continue to mail it, and I can talk why they did that. I mean, they're interpreting the REMS differently than most people do. They're interpreting it as not requiring in-person distribution, but most people think it does. So But then Biden got into office, and one of the first things that he promised was that he was going to remove this, or get rid of the REMS restriction for the duration of the pandemic. Well, it took a little while. It took several months until he had people in place in the FDA, and they got around to it. But in April, they resumed the lifting that REMS restriction in-person requirement. So since April of this year, all of these virtual abortion clinics have come back into business. So like Just the Pill, there's one called Choice based in California, Carafem, which is based in Atlanta, but serving about 6 or 8 states. Another one called Abortion on Demand, which serves, I think, 20 states. I've written profiles on a lot of these organizations for Ms., and so I can answer more questions if you'd like to know. So right now, all the states that don't have state level bans, the 19 states, including North Carolina, abortion is available by telemedicine. So here, for instance, in Massachusetts, where I live, we did not have telemedicine abortion before the pandemic, but now we do. There's a group called Forward Midwifery, which actually it's based not here. I'm forgetting where it's based, but they are offering telemedicine abortion for $150. You can talk to a doctor. You fill out an online form. They screen you. If you're okay, they mail you the abortion pill within a few days, and you pay $150. A lot of these online clinics are not taking. Hold on just one second. I'm sorry.
Carrie, you should now be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, sorry, I just had to unmute myself to tell my son to not speak quite so loudly. And I realized wonderful. I wasn't a co-host and I couldn't unmute myself.
That's
so
okay.
Anyway, this is really revolutionary that abortion pills are available through the mail. And one reason is because it means that you don't have to cross the lines of protesters screaming at you. And, you don't have to drive across the state. Many people live in rural areas and have to travel long distances to get physically to states that have waiting periods. It means you have to go in and then wait a few days and go back again. So this has been really revolutionary. But what about in states that ban telemedicine abortion? Texas is one of them. Obviously, I mentioned North Carolina is one of them. There is an organization called Plan C Pills, which has an amazing website which tells people how they can access abortion pills online, even if it's technically, there are no providers in their states who are legally allowed to distribute pills. And I'll tell you how that works. There are a number of providers outside of the United States who are doctors who will prescribe these medications and mail them to people within the United States. In Texas, it's not illegal to order pills online. People order pills from abroad online all the time. The FDA, technically, you're not supposed to. People do it all the time, and the FDA has said that they're not going to go after individuals ordering medications from outside of the United States, in part because it's the way people get inexpensive medications, right? I mean, abortion pills is one, but there's plenty that people order from out of the country. And, it may be eventually that a couple states do have laws that prohibit people from self-managing their abortions, but it's actually only about 5 or 6 states that do this. And there have been some cases where states have criminally prosecuted people for self-managing abortion, but it's usually abortion much later in pregnancy, not in the first trimester. So after Texas, banned abortion at 6 weeks on September 1st. The websites of organizations like Plan C and some of these clinics outside of the United States, one is called Aid Access. The number of hits on their websites went through the roof. Like Plan C, the number of hits went up 2,000%. Aid Access went from 2,000 hits a day to 30,000 hits a day. Plan C took a illuminated truck around West Texas with a large, illuminated sign saying, order abortion pills through, here's how to get information about how to order abortion pills. And they wanted to let people know. And Aid Access will actually, you can order advanced provision pills. In other words, you can go on their website, and even if you're not pregnant, even if you don't currently need the pill, but you want to have them in your medicine cabinet just in case, Dr. Sarah Gompertz, who's based, by the way, in the Netherlands, and she's the doctor who oversees Aid Access, she will fill a prescription for you and have the pills mailed to you. And you can keep them in your medicine cabinet just in case you need them. And this is, I think, what a lot of people are doing. And I think this is why, God forbid, post-Roe is not going to look like pre-Roe. Now, that said, it's still horrible. And obviously, a lot of people want to be able to go to a doctor and see a doctor in person. A lot of people are going to need procedural abortions, not just medication abortion. The FDA allows medication abortion through 10 weeks. The World Health Organization says it's safe through 12 weeks. You can actually use these pills much later in pregnancy, but it's it gets harder the later you use it in pregnancy. And, if you use it later in pregnancy, it's not going to be a period that comes out, right? And so a lot of, it's better if it's used very early in pregnancy. So that's where we stand on the abortion pill. And, the other thing that I think is really important to know is that the Biden administration has also directed the FDA to reconsider the REMS restriction. And the FDA has announced that it is reconsidering this restriction. And, people are sending in volumes of evidence showing how safe abortion pills are. And again, it's just that first pill. It's the mifepristone, which is so limited. Misoprostol actually is widely available. It's an ulcer drug. And I think it actually, veterinarians pass it out to be used for, I think it's arthritis for dogs or something like that. It's quite widely available. And it's also effective just used alone, but less effective. So if you use the combination of mifepristone and misoprostol, it's 95% effective. If you just use misoprostol, it's about 85% effective. So, but it's much easier to get because it's at any pharmacy. There is off-label uses for it. But the campaign around with the FDA has to do with trying to make mifepristone much more available. And the fact that it's not prescribed through pharmacies and that it requires people that distribute it to actually stock it themselves, it means that many doctors don't do medication abortion. But if it were to be made available by prescription, I mean, anybody, any GP could prescribe abortion pills. You wouldn't have to be an abortion doctor. You wouldn't even have to be an OBGYN. Your general healthcare practitioner, if you went in and said, I think I'm pregnant, can I get mifepristone, they could prescribe it easily. And then you could just go to the pharmacy and get it. And by the way, some doctors, Carefem, it prescribes it as a missed period pill. So in other words, you don't even have to do a pregnancy test. If you miss your period and you want it to come back and you don't even want to know whether you're pregnant, they will prescribe it and you can take it and your period will come back. Isn't that interesting? And, for some people, it might be difficult, to know you're pregnant and then have an abortion. For some people, it might be easier just not to know and just like, I'm not having my period. I really want it to come back. I'm going to take this pill. And so that's another really interesting angle on this story. If you Google missed period pills, you can read more about that. And, you know, again, I think that the world is very different. I think COVID has had this really interesting impact on making more people aware of abortion pills, putting more pressure on the FDA to remove needless restrictions, and just to raise awareness about abortion pills. One other kind of other wrinkle is before COVID, the sort of standard medical procedure for prescribing abortion pills was to do an ultrasound and to date pregnancy. But all the evidence showed that most patients know when their last period was and know how pregnant they are. And the only reason to do the ultrasound is to date the pregnancy. So if you were in a state without an ultrasound requirement, you can do telemedicine abortion. And this no test medication abortion protocol has been popularized because of COVID, because of more and more doctors prescribing abortion pills by telemedicine. And I think it's having a dramatic shift in standard medical protocol around abortion pills. So I really think post-COVID, assuming there's the FDA does at least lift the in-person distribution requirement, that we're going to be living in a very different world in those 20 plus states that don't prohibit telemedicine abortion. Now, in states like North Carolina, I think that you will be in a better position to try to get the ban on telemedicine abortion overturned once the FDA has removed the REMS restriction. I actually wrote an article about this. I said that, you know, yes, if the FDA overturns the restriction in those 19 states, you still won't have telemedicine abortion. But what I argued is that it will give you a grounds for arguing for the removal of that restriction. Because that's what states have used as an excuse for putting restrictions in place is, oh, it's a dangerous drug. The FDA has it under the REMS protocol. Well, it's not a dangerous drug. And once the FDA modernizes and depoliticizes, hopefully, their restrictions on medication abortion, I think we live in a different world. So we'll see what happens with that. So, okay, so I've been talking probably for way too long. Oh gosh, it's already 7:42. Let me just say a few things about North Carolina and North Carolina law. So Guttmacher Institute sort of rates different states depending on whether they're sort of abortion friendly or abortion hostile. And it's kind of on a scale from like 1 to 5. North Carolina is considered abortion hostile. Now, not completely, it's not in the like bright red category, it's in the sort of like magenta category, but it is considered abortion hostile. That said, you know, well, let me just say a little bit about some of the laws, and you may already all know this, but I'll just tell you a little bit about where you stand. I mean, one of the things that makes you abortion hostile is that your state does not allow telemedicine abortion. And that's a huge thing, especially during the pandemic. But other things are things like you have a 72-hour waiting period. You prohibit minors from accessing abortion without parental consent. You prohibit public funding of abortion, but also insurance companies. So wait, I have this, I printed this out. You prohibit private insurance companies, both public and private insurers, from including abortion coverage in their health plans. That's what North Carolina state law does. So in other words, you might have a great insurance plan, but when it comes to abortion, you have no coverage. So that means you have to fund it out of pocket. And that's where you get abortion funds. So you in North Carolina have a wonderful abortion fund. And I wrote the name of it down right here, Carolina Abortion Fund. So there are, because of various Oh, interesting. We passed so much of this as part of the motorcycle safety bill passed at midnight. Interesting. Interesting. I want more of that in a minute. But basically, because of the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits federal funding of abortion, and because of many states' restrictions on state funding of abortion, across the country grew, starting back in the 70s or early 80s, abortion funds. And we have between 70 and 80 abortion funds across the country that are private groups that raise money from just individuals and foundations and groups. And they have hotlines or warm lines or sometimes cold lines. And you call in if you need money to help get your abortion. And these groups pledge money to you to get abortion. So it's really like mutual aid or just women helping women. And I was the president of the Abortion Rights Fund of Western Massachusetts for some time. And, we helped a lot of people in Massachusetts, but a lot of people, and we have great health insurance. Our state does cover it, but there's still a lot of people that fall through the cracks because of things like copays, or they're, just moved to the state, or they're young people that don't want to do it on their parents' health insurance for privacy reasons and other things. So anyway, you don't allow insurance to cover abortion. You also, you did have a ban on abortion at 20 weeks, which goes all the way back to 1974, but it was overturned in May of 2019, interestingly. So technically, there you have access until viability, which again is like 24 weeks. You have what's called TRAP laws. These are targeted regulation of abortion provider laws, which are all sorts of medically unnecessary regulations that are passed just to basically harass abortion clinics and run them out of business. And these are common across the country, but you have them as well. So that's another thing. You also have a ban on abortion for sex selective reasons. Now, nobody does this, but this is just a way of racially profiling Asian American people seeking abortion because of stereotypes about sex selective abortion in India and China. Now, sex selection of abortion does happen in India and China, but there's absolutely no evidence that people in the United States are doing it. And the NAPOF, the National Asian Pacific Islander, Asian American and Pacific Islander Women's Forum, has done a lot of research on this question, and there's no evidence that Asian American women are choosing to have abortion because of the sex of their fetus. But this is really just a way, it's sort of a racist law to profile women of color. You also, interestingly, recently your state passed legislation banning abortion based on the race of the fetus, which is another strategy that anti-abortion groups use to try to force providers to racially profile their patients. But Roy Cooper vetoed the legislation in June. So that didn't get into law, interestingly. And again, I don't know all the politics around that, but you probably do. A woman in North Carolina must undergo an ultrasound before obtaining an abortion, and the provider must offer her the option to view the image. The law originally required that the provider show the person the image, but that was challenged in court and struck down. So clearly you're fighting the good fight there in North Carolina and getting some laws struck down that restrict abortion access, but some are still in place. And I realize it's now 7:48 and I've been talking. So maybe I should just pause here and open it up to questions. And just a couple things I want to say quickly before I wrap up. There is an attempt in Congress to try to codify Roe. And actually, just this past week, the Women's Health Protection Act passed the US House of Representatives. What the Women's Health Protection Act would do is say that basically it would codify Roe. It would say women have a right to abortion, along the lines of Roe, pre-viability without any sort of burdens, post-viability in cases of health or life endangerment. And this is hugely important legislation. It will be filibustered in the Senate. So the only way it will pass the Senate is that we get rid of the filibuster, and that's obviously difficult, but there is a push to try to do that. Another really important piece of federal legislation is the Each Woman Act, which is a law. Actually, I think it's called the Each Act now. It would get rid of the Hyde Amendment, which prohibits Medicaid coverage of abortion, and also the ban on federal insurance covering abortion. And this is really, really important because most abortion now, it's low-income women who need abortion, in part because often they don't have access to comprehensive contraception, and because of other conditions in their lives. And so, abortion funds are largely helping low-income women access abortion who are disproportionately women of color. And so it's really an important reproductive justice issue that we remove the Hyde Amendment and make sure that everybody has access to abortion, not just people who can afford it. In addition, by the way, the Hyde Amendment, the budget was submitted for the first time in over 40 years without the Hyde Amendment by Biden. So that's another approach to maybe getting rid of the Hyde Amendments. We'll see what happens with that. Okay, so I know I've talked way too long, so I want to open it up to questions. Anybody have any questions or things you want to add?
Carrie, we're with you here, and we have asked people to put questions into the chat. I have taken off the, people can now unmute themselves if they want to, but I think it's easier if we have questions just to ask them in the chat. I would like to start off with one. Do you ever worry about your own safety?
I don't. I mean, I definitely get targeted a lot online, not only because I write on these issues, but also like I wrote a series on the attacks on critical race theory. I got a lot of hate mail for that. I try to be smart. I try to the degree that I can, not personally identifying information online. I do, but it helps that I'm up here in Northampton, Massachusetts. So I'm in a very progressive community. As far as like the hate I get on Twitter or whatever, I don't pay attention to it. Or I try not to pay attention to it. I mean, they do like send me personal emails and sometimes like get a hold of my office phone and leave hate mail on my office phone. But I really try to like give it as little of my attention as possible. I get a ton of support from people on my writing and, when I go and speak, and that really helps to sort of balance out. And I feel very, very strongly about these things. So, I mean, I'm sort of at the stage of my life. I mean, my kids are up and out. I'm not like worried about, that as much. They have different last names, so nobody's going to find them. But I think about it, and I it does worry me a little bit. Yeah.
It would worry me a little bit. I'm worried for you.
Yeah. I'm looking at some of the other questions, but does anybody have anything?
I'd like to know what you think about the Each Act. Is it something we can write letters, make phone calls?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely. So the Each Act, so the Women's Health Protection Act, which is the law that would codify Roe, has already passed the House. So you don't need to contact your House member for that, but you should contact your senators. Because that is now in the Senate, technically. It has been introduced. I think it was introduced by Senator Cardin and Senator Murkowski of Alaska. So it is a bipartisan bill, but it doesn't have 10 Republicans willing to vote for it. And I'm not sure about Sinema and Manchin where they stand, but anyway, so that call your senators on that. As far as the EACH Act, which is the act that would remove the Hyde Amendment, that hasn't been voted on yet, to my knowledge, in the House. So yes, you can contact your House members as well as your senators on that. But more importantly, urge your members of Congress around the filibuster, not only for abortion rights, but also for voting rights. I wrote a piece talking about the connections between voting rights and abortion rights. They're absolutely intertwined. States that are suppressing the vote are also restricting abortion. And often these, like the week that the Texas SB 8 went into effect, was the week that Texas passed its voter suppression law. These things are deeply entwined. They are not just in that Republicans support both, but that in suppression of abortion has deep roots in white supremacy. And it has a lot to do with who reproduces and who doesn't reproduce. There's a very strong interest in having white women not have abortions. And, often restrictions on abortion are paired with coercive sterilization or other kinds of policies that make it harder for women of color to have children. And so, I've written on this and I can share some of my writing on these kinds of things, or you can just go to the link I put at the beginning. But I think that we need to lift the filibuster, not just for abortion rights, but also for voting rights and other things as well. But yes, definitely contact your members of Congress around both the EACH Act, the Women's Health Protection Act, and the filibuster.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
And I see in here that NC now has a push for people to write letters to the editor and op-eds about how inappropriate, CPCs.
Yes.
Yeah, so I wanted to mention that. That was actually on my list and I hadn't gone to it. So CPCs are what used to be called crisis pregnancy centers, but now folks are calling them anti-abortion centers or fake clinics. There are 110 in North Carolina. There's only about 25 abortion clinics or abortion facilities in North Carolina, but there's over, multiple times that of these fake clinics, organizations that try to look like clinics to lure people in, and then it gives them misleading information. North Carolina is one of a handful, well, not more and more now, is one of the states that gives public funding to these crisis pregnancy centers that mislead pregnant people about the safety of abortion. They tell them that abortion causes breast cancer. It does not. They tell them that abortion causes psychological distress. It does not. It relieves psychological distress. And there's really solid evidence on these things. They tell them that it causes infertility. It does not cause infertility. They tell women that they're less pregnant than they are. So the woman thinks she has more time to make a decision so that when she finally goes to a real doctor, she's too late to get an abortion. They're very, very deceptive and it's dangerous. If a woman has an ectopic pregnancy and they delay her from going to a real doctor, she could die. And so, but they don't care. And so, they give her lots of misinformation. So I see some of this data coming into the House proposed 4 million to CPCs in this budget. The Senate proposed 9 million. In 2013, they provided them for the first time 250,000, but it's just gone up and up since then. And I'm looking 2017, it was 1.3 million. And now I guess it's in the multiple million. You're also one of the states that has a Choose Life license plate that goes to these CPCs. There's no choice license plate.
Not yet.
This is not yet. I hope that you do. It's always felt like a First Amendment violation that there would only be, it's not neutral. It's only one side of the issue. That's always, bothered me. But yeah, this is a huge issue. And there's I wrote a couple pieces on CPCs and activism against CPCs that you can find on my website. But there's a group called Equity Forward, which did a deep analysis of state funding of CPCs. And so you should access that report because they probably talk about what's happening in North Carolina, and that could be useful for you in your organizing against that funding.
Great. Thank you so much. Because
Can we, wait, I would like to just ask Helen and Galia, what are you talking about, the motorcycle vagina bill? What is that? You can unmute yourselves now. I've taken off the restriction.
So I forget it. So I think that was 2013, and the terrible bill went through the House or the Senate, one of them, I forget which, and everyone was watching for it to come out the other side so we could be out there and protest in Raleigh. And it wasn't coming, and it wasn't coming, and all of a sudden somebody noticed, like, there's this motorcycle helmet bill on the docket. Like, why? Okay, well, what they did is they gutted the motorcycle helmet bill and put all this anti-abortion stuff in it.
Wow.
And that's how they tried to sneak it past. And so we found out about it and had fits, but they passed it in the motorcycle helmet bill. So we were calling it the motorcycle vagina bill.
Very good.
But, you know, things changed so badly here in 2011 and 2013 with McCrory.
Right.
The other thing to keep in mind is that literally happened in the middle of the night at like
Yeah.
12:30 or 1 a.m., which
Yes.
if you dismiss all legislatures, everyone's driving home, and we've got a huge state. People travel great distances to serve in our legislature, and you tell your caucus that you're coming back into session, but you don't tell the other side until you just about have to. Not all of them can drive back quickly enough.
It's amazing that
Yes.
that's allowed. I just, by the way, put in the chat box the report from Equity Forward that talks about these CPCs and how they are getting funded through, they're using TANF funding. So that's welfare money. In other words, welfare money that's supposed to go to poor women to support their children, they're redirecting it towards these CPCs to force those same poor women to have more children without the support to raise them. It's very evil. It's very, very evil.
Well,
Let's see now.
seeing that
Yeah.
differently.
Many of them have religious bent also.
Exactly, Joan. Yeah. So these organizations are getting state money to run these CPC centers that are often about pushing their religion.
Yeah.
So I think you could argue that that's also a violation of the
Yes.
First Amendment. and
Separation of
really,
church and state. Where is it?
Oh,
Right.
totally. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm just looking through, are there other questions? I feel like I saw somebody asked about young people and how are young people going to find out about, here, 16 abortion clinics and 120 crisis pregnancy centers. Thanks for those updated numbers. Yeah, absolutely. And NARAL North Carolina did a report a few years ago about these anti-abortion centers. Yeah, I found that. Actually, here it is. I'm going to pop that into the box because I thought that was a great report. It was from I think it was from 2017, so it's not even that old, but it gives some specifics. I just dropped that into the box about CPCs in North Carolina. But somebody asked me about how do particularly young people and low-income people, it was way back there. Yeah, how do young uneducated women learn about the funds and the websites? That's from Jay. Yeah, so this is a problem, right? I mean, not only do folks not have access to money, but they also often don't have access to information. And, as the president of an abortion fund here in Massachusetts, we struggled with this all the time. Like, how do we get out there? How do we get folks to know about us? And, we had to go to community health centers. We had to, at points we would have like billboards or, like things on the side of buses. We would use social media. Actually, I think social media is a really great way to reach young people because even the poorest of young people or the people, young people that are most isolated, often they are on social media. And so finding the social media places where they are, like Instagram, so we would hire young people into our organization to do social media campaigns to reach other young people, to try to get them information that abortion funds exist or, information about, access to these, to support for them. But that is a huge issue. definitely, is getting the word out there. And I mean, you saw what Plan C did. They took a truck and drove it around the streets of West Texas, across the college campuses. At night, the truck was illuminated. At night, they drove through the restaurant and bar district, and they would stop and hand out candy and cards with information and say, share. And then they went into bathrooms all over, in airports and schools, and put stickers with information about Plan C. So Plan C has a website, and I should drop their web, it's Plan C pills.org. And they have a guide, and there's a drop-down menu, and you can put your state in there and find out exactly what's available in your state. And actually, what we should do is do North Carolina, because of course, it'll be a little tricky for you because you are a state without in-state providers because of your laws. And so I'm just finding North Carolina right now, which is not to say you don't have access to it, but it means that you don't have it. It's not, it's not an in-state provider. So I'm calling up North Carolina here, and I'm going to share my screen, which I assume I can still do.
You should be able to.
Okay, so let me just share my screen and we'll see what it says
Yeah.
for North Carolina. Is this it? I think it is. Okay, so this is the Plan C website, and this is their guide to abortion pills. Okay, and if you scroll down, you'll see this drop-down menu, and you can select your state. Oops, you're not North Dakota. You're North Carolina. And then you go down, and mailed pills with clinician support. So you do not have the possibility of a doctor in state. Like if I do this in Massachusetts, it comes up with a doctor in state who will mail these pills. You don't have that because it's not allowed. Doctors in your state are not allowed to do it. So the only one that is mailed pills with clinician support is Aid Access, which is based out of the country. It's in the Netherlands. And the reason they say yellow light is because it's not entirely, it's understand the potential risks of using this service. The service is provided by a licensed physician from overseas. The pills are provided are generic versions of the medication, which are shipped from an Indian online pharmacy. It has been vetted though. All the pills on this website have been vetted. And I'll explain that more in just a minute. There's also a legal helpline. This is run by an organization called If, When, How. If you ever are concerned about legal issues in relation to ordering pills online, you can call their helpline. And they also have a new fund that represents people that might have problems in this area. So other than that, they have information about getting pills, just ordering it online. So there's a number of websites that and these are just websites that sell pills. These are not websites that have physicians overseeing them. But there's a lot of information online about how to use these pills without physicians' support. And all of this has been vetted. So in other words, Plan C ordered pills from all of these websites. This is how much they had to pay. This is how long it took to get there. And then once they got the pills, they sent them to a lab and had them tested to make sure that they were the real deal. Most abortion pills now come from India. They're made in India and come from there. And it's a brand, like it's a brand packet that, is pretty common. So I actually helped them do this research. So I ordered a lot of these pills. This one actually is $4.70. The reason it's so expensive is I ordered it overnight. And so I got it in 4 days, but most of that was the overnight delivery charge. But some of the other ones are less, like this one's $200, but it takes longer. Mm-hmm. The same thing with Aid Access. It's a couple weeks, which is kind of a bummer, which is the reason to order them in advance and have them in your medicine cabinet. And the range actually, it can be as low as $105 to order them online. And then there's other information about in person. So, you can order them in person. By the way, they also talk about mail forwarding. So if you wanted to order it from in the country through a provider and have it mailed to a mailbox in that state and then have it forwarded to you in North Carolina, that is another way that some people are gaining access to abortion pills.
That is great information. Thank you so much, Carrie. This has been so helpful. Really
Yeah.
enjoyed this. Any other questions from any of the participants? Anything else?
Yeah, Terry, it's Helen. Sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt, just quickly. So it's great to be with you all this evening. Sorry for the lack of a camera. I'm at the end of the week and I look like crap. Thank you, Professor Baker. Appreciate it. One thing I would say that really troubles me, I ran for state senate. And so in Anson County, which many of us think is probably like-minded in some ways, very rural, there are large billboards from the Department of Health about how you can receive your long-term acting implant birth control. It's a nice looking young lady,
Yeah.
talks about come in, get your 3-year long-term birth control, don't disrupt your plans. And I wonder if there isn't a space for the League of Women Voters of Moore County to push the Moore County Health Department to do the same. This would not be, we know we're not going to get very far in our own little niche on abortion, right? That's the reality of where we live. But if birth control, long-acting birth control were more widely publicized and available, that might move the needle slightly for some young women's lives. And that's really what we're talking about here. So I offer that to you as a possibility of a project for the League of Women Voters in Moore County that, I'm sure most people in Moore County don't think very highly of Anson County because it's less wealthy and, more rural. But why aren't we doing the same that they are? And I would have thought that the ladies on this call could make that happen.
Helen,
Thank you,
that's a
Helen.
great suggestion. Thank you so much. Yes,
No,
we
thank
should
you.
take that. We should take that under wraps. Absolutely. Anything else? Anybody?
I would like, before we leave, we dedicated this seminar to Dot Greenwood, and I want to make sure she's with us. Believe me, she's now within the digital world. She passed last week. She was 94 years old, 93, 94 years old.
53.
93. And this woman, there was no stopping her when it came to this subject.
Right.
She was a force of nature. Is Tara Romano still on? Tara from NARAL was here with us, and she sent a nice note back to us. Anyone who knew Dot loved her. Didn't want to get too close because she always made you do something. She
She was a
was
doer.
spectacular.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And this is once again dedicated to Dot.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining us. And Dr. Baker, thank you so much for all of this. It's big, big, big help.
My pleasure. Wonderful to be here with you tonight. And thank you for your really important work. Really appreciate it.
We
Thank
try.
you. Thank you all.
Okay.
Good night.
Thank
With
you.
that, we
Good
will
night.
end this meeting, and thank you all so much for being with us. Adios.